Cool. So welcome back. We are making our way through the book. And last week, we kind of started to touch upon what the Atman is. It was something that is the enlivening principle. We are aware, we are conscious beings, but we usually tend to attribute this, life or aliveness to something else, not realizing that, this subjective experience is the aliveness and not the objective experience. And because of the subjective aliveness, the objective stuff appears to move and appears to be alive. And this is the sort of false understanding, or this lack of understanding, or this ignorance that results in us getting entangled with what we see. And we're going to continue to make this journey of, and we're going to learn this new concept of superimposition, of how we superimpose this enlivening principle on whatever we perceive, and and the reverse, where we think we are inert, whereas actually the world is inert, and vice versa. So there is this life in us, and because of this life in us, we project this life onto other things, external things. So I think my personality is more real than me, or I think my identity is more real than me, whereas there is this life which is actually the real aspect of us. And we're going to kind of go into that. So before we begin, anyone has any thoughts about what we've covered so far? How's I hope everyone has has a meditation practice, like making sure this is not just like weekly thing. We want to kind of make this a part of our life, where every day we have some time we're dedicating to meditation, and then in the world as well, we are starting to notice and see if these ideas that we are learning here is actually true or not. And that's kind of how we get our own direct experience of all of this work. So that's the sort of mechanism of how this thing will actually transform the life. If no one has any thoughts, we can begin. I think we were on verse 20, if I remember. We finished verse 20. So let me share my screen. Okay. All right, verse 20 is what we did. So we will do verse 21 today. Dehendriya guna karman amale satchidatmani adhyasyasya yavivekena gagane nilatadivat. So fools, because they lack in their powers of discrimination, superimpose on the self the nature of the absolute existence knowledge, Sat Chit, all the varied functions of the body and the senses, just as they attribute blue color and the light to the sky. Good. So here we're, the author is kind of being a little harsh and calling us fools. And the sort of word here is deha, which kind of means like illusion. The problem is that because of our misunderstanding, right? Like, so when you consider somebody as a fool, it's more like, they just don't have a good understanding. And because of this lack of understanding, and in this specific verse, like the lack in discriminating, and discriminating is seeing what is really true. And because of this lack of discrimination, we end up superimposing on the self, things that are not self. So for example, the body is the one that is decaying, right? Like we that's in a constant process of decay. The moment we are born, it grows for a certain amount of time, and then it starts to decay. The mind is also in decay, right? Like we had a very, maybe when we were younger, it was a much sharper mind, but moment we hit a certain amount of age, our mind is going to start to decay. We stop remembering things, our capacity to like work and stuff also goes down. So like that's also in decay. And what ends up happening is that we attribute me as like, my identity to the body, and I say I am decaying, or like my mind is getting slow, or I am not smart, or I am I don't know, like weak or strong, or whatever the sort of adjective we use. We tend to do the superimposition, where actually I'm not attributing the qualities of the self, but I'm attributing the qualities of the body and the mind and the world onto the self. And this is the misunderstanding. Just like, and like the real world analogy is like, even though the world, we look at the sky and says, oh wow, it's blue sky, beautiful. But in reality, we know that it's just an optical illusion, right? There's the scattering of rays, and that causes the blue color in the sky. So we're going to kind of go down this path of continuing to like look at this idea from different angles of, whatever we perceive is not the self. So whatever idea or whatever quality that we see, if I'm feeling high energy, if I'm feeling low energy, if I'm feeling strong and I'm feeling weak, I'm feeling confident, I'm not feeling confident, all of those are experiences for sure. Just like the blue sky, it's an experience. But actually that's not true, right? Like I am not feeling high energy and I am not feeling low energy. Something else that is feeling high energy. But the I is, existence and knowledge. Like that's the one that is revealing to me the nature of my mind, the nature of my body, the nature of this world, which has qualities, right? The world has qualities, the body has qualities, but the I has really no qualities. It just is, and it has the property of revealing things to us because we are conscious, and it's not something like an idea that we want to like look at. It's like right now I know I'm conscious, right? We can all close our eyes and say, yes, I am conscious. We open our eyes, I'm still conscious. If I get lost in a project, I was still conscious. If I get lost and angry in an emotion, and I'm still conscious of that too. Every moment this consciousness is, but sometimes I forget. Like that is the problem, right? We all forget, and then we get lost in whatever is being revealed. So it could be an emotion, it could be an experience, could be a memory, it could be a thought. All of that is like revealing, is being revealed to us, right, in our awareness. But this awareness is always on. We are never not aware. And we want to keep getting familiar with this awareness, because once we get familiar with this awareness, we will see that it's always there. There's not a moment when it is not there. There's this, the way we learn things is kind of through like comparing, right? So like if I say, this is a cup right here, when I look at something else, like this is a bottle, I can say, yes, this is a bottle and that is a cup, because it's different, right? The cup is different from the bottle. So when I look at a cup, I can say, yes, it is not a bottle. And when I look at a bottle, I can say, yes, it's not a cup. And that's kind of how we objectively learn about things. Even as kids, when we start to learn things, we always identify things as, this is something and this is something else. And then this is a table and this is a chair, right? Like, so when we look at something, we are sort of building a mental model of this world through names. And then when something isn't present, we can say, yes, it is missing. So that's kind of like the mechanism of learning through observation, and then the lack of observation, or the lack of presence of the object while you're observing. But the problem with the self is that it's always on. There's no moment when it is not on. So the way our mind learns things, we cannot learn about the self in the same way, because there is not a moment when the self is off. So there's no way to say, oh, that's when the self was on. And that's why it is so sort of difficult and confused, and you can get confused, because our normal methods of learning cannot come in here. There's a different kind of method of learning that needs to be applied. And because it's so, in the end, we will all have this experience that, oh, wow, it is so simple and it is right here, right now, all the time. But because our method of learning is not tuned to this approach, it takes a while to kind of like get tuned to this way of learning. And the way of learning is what? Is to remove everything that is not self. So, we went through the 5 bodies. So we want to remove the physical, we want to remove the emotional, we want to remove the energy, we want to remove the intellect, and what remains is the self. And so we call this process neti neti. It's the process of negation. So we remove what is not self, and what is left is the self. And you're not going to see it as like an object and say, oh wow, yes, this is the self. It's more like, how do I say it? It's more like it is self-revealing in that way. It's like we don't never doubt that I am, right? Like I don't ever doubt that I am. I always am. I'm always on. I'm always aware. But the problem is there's so much stuff in my awareness that I never pay attention to the source of where this awareness comes from. But the moment I remove everything from my awareness, all of the objects, then the source of awareness becomes absolutely clear, without a doubt. And it's, there's no words that can describe it because it's not an object of experience, but it is still experienceable. So that's the sort of contradiction in language. But, experience is always greater than language, and language can only say so much. So if this doesn't make sense, don't worry. We will kind of, keep going down the same idea, and over time, it will make sense. Any thoughts about this one? Okay, let's do the next one. Ajnanan sapopadhe kartritva dini chatmani kalyapante ambugate chandre chalanadhi yathabhasah. So due to ignorance, the tremblings that belong to the water are attributed to the reflected moon dancing on it. Likewise, the agency of actions and so on are delusively understood as the nature of the self. Okay, so here, we're given another image, which is like a very nice image. So you can imagine in the middle of the night, you're maybe out camping, and you're camping by a lake, and you see this beautiful lake, and it's a full moon, and because of the light, you can see everything. You can see the lake. There's like, tremblings on the water, and then in the water is the moon being reflected. And the lake is very clear, so the moon is like also very clear, and you can see it in great detail. And then, it's a very windless night, so there's absolutely no waves on it, so it's absolutely still and clear. So when you look at the lake, you can almost think that, wow, the moon is right on the on the earth, right? Like the lake is literally reflecting the moon, and it looks absolutely real. But then I can throw a rock on the lake, and then these ripples start on the surface of the water, and the moon now has these, shimmerings and the tremblings of the water. And to a child who does not understand that, it's actually a reflection, can look at it and be like, oh my God, the moon is like shaking, or the moon has, broken, or something is happening to the moon. And that's the sort of same thing that's happening in our experience, where we are seeing images of ourselves. Like, whatever we see is kind of like a reflection of what? The reflection of, the awareness of the self shining and being reflected on whatever object that's in perception. And it gets reflected, and then we observe it through our senses and our mind, and we form this world. So there's this sort of, you can imagine, like, when we were a kid, we learned about, like, physics and how we see things, how the eye sees things. So the light shines on objects, and then because of the reflection of the light against the object is perceived in the eye, right? In the same way, the self is shining. like there's like light of awareness shining and landing on this entire world. You know, right now I'm in my room, so it's landing on these walls, and then the walls is reflecting light, that same awareness. And then through my mind and through my memory and all of my sort of impressions, I can formulate the concept that yes, I'm in my room, this is my home, you know, I'm in front of my computer. So all of that is happening, including the fact that the eye is operating and the senses are also operating. All of this sort of information is coming through. And so in the same way, it's like a reflection. So this room is actually a reflection of this awareness, and it's being sort of processed by this mind, and this experience is being revealed to me. So that's sort of the mechanics of how, you know, we experience stuff moment to moment, where, you know, if I go outside, you know, my house, then my experience is going to change, right? I can then see the sky, and, you know, the rays of my awareness are going much further. Like if I'm seeing a tree in a distance, my rays of awareness is going very far away and being reflected and coming back, and being processed. And then I can say, yes, that is a tree, because my mind is coming in, and because of memory and because of this compare and contrast analogy, I can say, yes, that is a tree, and that is a car, and that is the sky, all of that. But the cause of all of it is this awareness that is sort of revealing stuff to me. And so in the same way, you know, the example here is the moon on the lake. But actually there is this moon out there, and that is the real moon. The reflection and the properties of, like, you know, the tremblings and all of that is not happening to the real moon. The moon is still unchanging. And, you know, if the water is dirty, the moon is going to look dirty. If there's a lot of, like, people in the water, there's going to be a lot of ripples. So the moon's reflection is going to be not clear. So all of the attributes that actually is on the reflection and not on the real moon. The real moon is separate, untouched by anything on the water. So in the same way, you know, the body and the mind, all of those things are the ones that are changing. The self is untouched. And here we are given, you know, something, a new idea called, you know, the agency of actions. So this is, we're going to sort of maybe segue into a different concept. So, you know, whenever we talk about agency, which is, you know, why do we do the things that we do, or who really does the things that we do? That's an interesting question, right? Like, if I look at my life, and if I have all of these things that I'm doing, where are those, you know, why am I doing those things? And we can, some people can say, yes, I am doing it, you know, like the sense of, like, I am somehow controlling it and I'm doing the work. And a lot of people actually say that, right? Like we all take sort of responsibility for our actions, and we say, yes, I did this and I did not do this. I should have done this. I should not have done that. And there's a sense of agency that, you know, there's something that is the cause of doing actions. But if we analyze it a little bit, we will come to see that, you know, the things that we do moment to moment, and where we seem to think that I made this choice of, you know, I'm drinking, you know, tea instead of coffee, is a conscious choice, right? And it seems like I am making this choice, but actually, if you look at it, it's actually not that I'm making this choice. It's happened because of a bunch of things that happened in the past. You know, I had a bunch of impressions, maybe when I was much younger. I had some experience that led me to like tea way more than coffee. And over time, because of repetition, like where I drank tea a lot more, now I have this desire for tea over coffee. And even though I can say, yes, I'm choosing to drink tea right now, but that choice is coming because of this accumulated things that have happened in the past. So Nicholas, you have a question?
So would you say that Advaita Vedanta has like a clear position on free will? Like, does it think there is like a concept of free will? Does that kind of translate over that idea?
Yeah. So that's a good question. So the concept is like there is will, but it is not this individualized will that we think of it as, you know. It's not like there is this so when we say free will, we're basically saying, does the ego have choice or not? Right? It's more like this individualized ego. Do I choose? And Advaita Vedanta says that no, you don't choose. It's the karma that you've accumulated in the past. And we haven't spoken of this other concept, which is called gunas, which is the quality of mind. What was the state of your mind when you were doing the things you were doing in the past that led you to sort of, which led to the creation of certain desires. And those desires are the one that cause you to do things. So the will that we're talking about isn't like a solid separate thing. It's sort of it's a, what is the word? It is a process. And it consists of the entirety of the past experiences that you've had. And the force, it's a force, you could say. It's a force that leads you to do the things that you do. And we are helplessly moved we sort of helplessly move in that direction, right? So like we all have the experience of saying every new year, January 1st, we make a New Year resolution, we make all these lists saying, yes, I will work out more, I will eat healthy, I'll maybe quit smoking or whatever, the things that we have. First 10 days, we probably do it, but then after a while it drops. Why? Not because, we don't have free will. It's just that there is a stronger force of the past that takes over. And this stronger force of the past has been built over time, right? And the good news is that it's a force of the past. That means that whatever things that I do now is going to have an effect on how I feel and do and the things that I do in the future. Because whatever I do now will become the force of the past for things in the future. So the now becomes very, very important, whereas like in the now I can make changes. And even though it may seem like these changes are useless, but over time, because of this concept of the force of the past, this force of the past is going to become very strong for some point in the future, where in the future you will be able to do whatever you set out to do. But it has to be sort of this consistent, deliberate practice of change and moving in in a different direction. So the concept of free will isn't quite true here, because free will essentially means that there is at least the Western understanding of free will is that there is this ego and there's this individual, and this individual is making choices. And the Advaita Vedanta says, no, that's not true. It's the past actions and what were the qualities of the mind when we were making those past actions that lead to the now. Like what are the choices I'm making right now, and why am I making those choices? It can all trace back to something in the past. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was a good response. Thanks.
So maybe it's worth talking about gunas. I believe we haven't come across this. So essentially, in the Vedanta, there is 3 states of mind. There is so the Sanskrit for each of them is tamas, which literally translates to ignorance or lethargy, or darkness is actually the real word. A real translation, but the quality of darkness is sort of, the sort of emotional quality to it is like, I'm feeling lazy, I'm feeling kind of depressed, I'm kind of like, feel like sleeping, I don't want to do anything. And we sort of have these states of mind, right, where we are sort of contracted. Our mind is very closed and contracted, and we're not excited about anything. So that's the sort of tamasic state of mind. So you may have heard this word too, if you've sort of been in this yogic world, where even food, if you're looking at eating certain kinds of food, there is this, some foods which are, you may have read, it's like tamasic in nature, which literally means that when you eat it, you become a little lazy or like bloated, or where you kind of want to sleep. You want to go unconscious. That's essentially how you can phrase tamas, is like, I want to go unconscious. And if you're getting drunk, or like you're getting like high on like drugs and stuff, like what's happening is we are moving the mind to a more tamasic state, because it's not able to function in its normal capacity, and that's tamas. Or if we overeat, and you're feeling super bloaty and you just want to pass out, that's also moving the mind towards unconsciousness. It's not anything to do with it's moralistic point of view, but it's just how it is, right? Like some actions lead to tamas. So that's the state of, like, it's considered the lowermost state of mind, because the mind really cannot do anything useful in that state. The next state after tamas is rajas. And this state is sort of, rajas literally translates to like heat or like, energy. And in this state, we are sort of, we have desires, right? Like I'm inspired to do something, but out of this egoistic view of things. Like, I want to be very successful. I want to prove to this person that I'm better than them. Or like I have, this deep desire to be rich, and I will do anything that I can to get there. So sort of this sort of passion, and I'm very angry, so I will do something, right? It always results in action, but the action is always has this motivation and a quality of egoism, and it's better than tamas, because in tamas we are basically doing nothing and we want to just sleep all day. But in the state of rajas, we are doing activity, and it's good because it's better than tamas, because in tamas we have no capacity to change. We just want to continue in the status quo and just be. Whereas in rajas, we want to prove something, or we want to get famous, or we want to do whatever, but there's this sense of activity. So we are trying things, and we're trying things, and maybe we're failing, and that resulting in disappointment, but still we're still like in this phase of like, yes, I want to try, I want to do something. And the next stage is called Satwa, which literally means clarity, calmness, and in this state, we are still doing work. So work is still being done, but it's being done with a coolness of mind, where the motivation isn't so much of an egoistic standpoint. It's more of like, yes, I have responsibilities, I have duties, I have a certain project that I have in mind that I want to complete, and I need to put work in it, and you just go at it. There's no sort of like sense of ego at all. You can think of like the modern sort of flow state, right? Like where you're just in flow. And when you're in flow, you're not really thinking of me, how am I doing? Am I better than somebody else? What are they thinking of me? Like that kind of like thoughts don't even exist. It's just about the work, and you're just in flow, and work is happening. So that's the sattva state, right? So there's 3 states: tamas, rajas, and sattva. Tamas is the darkness, ignorance, laziness. Rajas is a state of activity, but egoistic activity, where I want to do things because of my benefit, or like somehow I think I'm going to get something. And then sattva is that still activity is happening, but there's no ego. You're just in the flow state, and work is being done. And it's very difficult. Actually, before I say that, you can also, in our day-to-day, we kind of have experiences of all 3. When I wake up in the morning and I'm having a shitty, and I didn't sleep well, I'm feeling pretty tired and lazy, all I want to do is stay in bed and don't want to get out. So that in the morning, I may feel a little bit of tamas. Then I get out of bed, take a shower, and then I look at my calendar. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have all these things I need to do. And then the sense of rajas and activity starts, right? And then I'm looking at like my calendar. I have to talk to my boss. There's some performance review coming up, and I want to like make sure I'm ready for it. And so all of these sort of rajasic state of mind, where this ego is there, starts to play. And for some time, I'm in that state. And then I realize, oh, I actually have to do this reading for this thing that I'm writing. So I start to do some, read this book. And because this book is so engaging, I get lost in the activity. And while I'm reading, I have absolutely no clue that I'm even a human being, right? Like sometimes we get so engrossed in something, we just forget that I even, have this body. Like I'm just lost in the activity. So we have touched even sattva in that state. And this is happening all the time, moment to moment. And we can notice and see that what state am I in right now? And sometimes we're in rajas, sometimes we're in tamas, sometimes we're in sattva. It's happening. And it's like this circular motion. We can go from one to the other. But there's something interesting that you can kind of see where it's very difficult to go from tamas, which is the state of darkness and inactivity, to sattva, which is the state of just, egoless activity. Because so it's like kind of like trying to start a fire, right? If the wood is wet, there's no way for the fire to be blazing. You will have to first dry the wood out. You'll have to put it maybe in the sun, and then after some time, maybe it'll light, and then there'll be a bunch of smoke in it until the water kind of evaporates, and then maybe the fire will start going, right? The same way, there's no way for us to go from this inactivity to like the state of sattva, because the mind is just too contracted and too close. It's full of like, it's too wet in the analogy of the wood. So what you have to do is you have to like move it into a state of like, hey, do some activity for your own ego, right? So we kind of in modern psychology, we call it like reframing, where we say, oh, actually, you're not depressed, or like you're not a useless person, right? Like when we have this sense of like lack of confidence, you're like, oh, I'm not useless, I'm actually great, I can do all of these cool things, I can prove people wrong, like they don't know anything, so you kind of motivate yourself, and we motivate ourselves to move from inactivity to activity. And then we start doing things, because in the state of activity is the only place where we can change the way we work, so that we can move from activity to the state of sattva, which actually also in some worlds we call it non-activity, where you're still active, but there's no sense of agency there, because the sense of ego isn't present. So we want to like move in that direction always, to move into this place where my ego isn't on, like I'm not able to perceive my ego. So when you're feeling really like low and feeling lazy, the recommendation and the practice is to move to a sense of activity, whatever it is. Try to like not stay in bed if possible. And like maybe you can motivate yourself to be like, I'm just going to clean the room. And the moment we do that, our body is engaged in activity. And when it's engaged in the activity, we kind of come to the now a little bit. And in this place where we are active, we can then sort of move ourselves to this state of sattva. I know this was a little bit of a tangent, but we're going to like touch upon these concepts even as we go down this book. But essentially to remember is like, a practice that you can start to notice is that when we're doing work moment to moment, in the week, in the day, just start to notice like, what is my state of mind? Am I feeling contracted? Am I feeling lazy and lethargy and like I don't feel like doing anything? That's fine. This is just a process of observation. There's nothing, no changes have to happen. But we just want to get familiar that I am in the state of tamas, or I'm in the state of rajas, where wow, I'm really motivated. I'm motivated because I want to prove that I'm smarter than this other person. That's fine. That's the reality right now. But just notice that that's happening. In the same way, if you're really engaged in a project and lost, just notice that too. You're in the state of sattva. And ideally, we would want to move more and more towards the state of sattva, which is the state of flow. And why? Because in that state, we are the most efficient and the most creative and the most productive. And we want to get there. And then finally, we want to even go beyond that. But that is a separate conversation. Any thoughts about this? Okay, so let us do the next one. Rage chasu kadukhadi buddhau satyam pravartate sushuptau nasti tannashe tasmad buddhestu natmanaha. So attachment, desire, pleasure, pain, and so on are perceived to exist only as long as the mind or intellect functions. They are not perceived in deep sleep when the mind ceases to exist. Therefore, they belong to the mind alone and not the Atman. So the deep sleep is a great example that proves to us that the mind is necessary for suffering. Attachment, desire, pain, and even pleasure to some extent is essentially the word is dukkha. Like the Buddhists say that the world is suffering, right? That's what Buddha said. The world is full of suffering. Because why? Because the world is temporary. In the moment we say, moment we like attach ourselves to something, basically what we're saying is, I want this to exist forever. But unfortunately, that's not the world, right? Like the world is disintegrating. The moment something is created, it has become, it is in a state of degradation and disintegration. So it's only a matter of time before something gets destroyed. So the world, that's why they say the world is suffering, because the world is always decaying. And at some point it's going, either you're going to die or the object is going to go away. And because of these attachments and these desires that we have, we experience both pleasure and pain. When we get something that we want, we experience pleasure. And when we don't get something that we want, we experience pain. They're sort of the opposites of the coin. One cannot be without the other. And the fact is that everything that we gain, which gives us pleasure, is only a matter of time before we lose it, because it is temporary. So that is this unfortunate paradox of this world. And now the question is there a way to go beyond it? And the answer is yes. And then the other interesting observation of it is like there is moments in our experience where we don't feel this pleasure or pain or attachment and desires. And that is in our deep sleep, right? Like everybody loves a great deep sleep, because when we are in deep sleep, our entire world disappears. And we feel rested and blissful, and then when we wake up, all of these things come back to us. So it proves to us that the mind is sort of needed for these problems to exist. When the mind is in this seed form, in the state of deep sleep, none of these are perceivable, right? Like my financial problems are not perceivable when I'm in deep sleep. My social problems are not perceivable in my deep sleep. My work problems are not perceivable in the deep sleep. All these deadlines that I have to like hit for all these different projects I'm doing are not perceivable in my deep sleep. Nothing is perceivable, which is why deep sleep is great. But the moment we wake up, which is, what does that mean? Which basically means the mind is starting to function again. All of our problems start rushing back again. So this is the proof that the mind is the one that is the cause or the container for all of our attachments. Cameron, you have a question?
Yeah. So, would you say fundamentally we are like perceivers, or is perception more illusion?
So perception is the quality of the self. Rather, awareness is the quality of the self, and because of this awareness, there is perception. Does that make sense? So perceiving something is an experience, right? Like I perceive this phone, or I perceive this word, or I perceive this room. That's an experience, but this experience is a consequence. And a consequence of what? Consequence of the fact that we are aware. Because without this awareness, this experience wouldn't exist. And what would happen, there is actually a place that we can get to where even this perception isn't there. When we negate everything from our experience, all of the objects, all of our sensations, all of the thoughts, all of our emotions, all of them are negated for a certain amount of time, there's no perception of objects. But there is something else that remains, which is not an object. So there's no sort of, when I look at perception, it is mostly of something, right? Like, which is an external thing. But there is a place that we can get to where there's no perception at all. So that kind of, this may not be your direct experience right now, but that will prove to you that perception is a consequence and not fundamentally who we are.
I see. Thank you.
Just like how, the consequence of the mind is that I can think, right? I can think about something from the past. I can solve a problem. I can think of a idea. All of those things are consequences of the fact that the mind is there. The moment I cannot do that, it means the mind isn't there. So the same thing about perception too. Perception is sort of like you can think of it as like a consequence.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Cool. Any other thoughts? Okay, so the good news is that the mind is the one that has the problem, not the self. The self is always shining. The mind is the one that is got this container of desires and attachments and misunderstandings, and it's the mind alone that will be fixed. The self is actually ever free. So if you ever heard of like people say, oh, everyone is self-realized, it is true, because the self in me is the same as the self in you is the same in the self as anybody. The self never has a problem. It's the mind which has a problem. And the mind is the one that is going to be cured, or rather it's going to be fundamentally transformed. And essentially more than that, actually what's going to happen is going to dissolve. It's a process of like dissolution rather than a process of transformation. The false ideas that we have sort of just held on to over time will just drop away. And because it drops away, the self kind of like takes over. And that's the process. So it's kind of like, the floodgates of the self will open when these false ideas are dropped. And it can happen instantaneously, or it can take a certain amount of time, but everyone is moving in this direction. And we will see how that is true, that everyone is trying to move in this direction naturally. Good, let's do the next one. Prakasho karsyato yasya shaitam agnerya thoshanata swabhava satchidananda nitya nirmala atmanaha. So just as luminosity is the nature of the sun, coolness is that of water, and heat is that of fire, so too the nature of the Atman is eternity, purity, existence, consciousness, and bliss. All right, so now we're kind of getting into, in order to know something, we need to understand its nature, right? So the nature of the sun is to be luminous, which means it has light. So the moment when we look out on the window and we can see light, it means that the sun is out. When there's no light, it means that the sun is not there, right? So you don't need another light to reveal the sun, because the sun itself is light, and that's the essence. So you can think of the definition of nature as how my teacher frames it, is like it's the essence of something without which it wouldn't be what it is. So the nature of sun is to be luminous. The nature of water is to be cool. You can also say the nature of water is to be wet. If you have a fire, you can put water on it because it's the opposite, right? So the nature of fire is to be hot or is to be heat, and the nature of water is to be cool or wet. A fire wouldn't be fire if it isn't hot, right? Like that's like the essence of fire. Heat is like the essence of fire, and the coolness is the essence of water. Similarly, there is this essence of the self, without which it wouldn't be the self. It would be, if it doesn't have these qualities, it is something else. And what is that? What is the essence of the Atman? It is eternity, which means, this is an interesting word. It means like it's always there, right? It's never not true. And there's no, for us, the concept of time is a mental concept, right? Like we can say something happened 2 years ago, but we have to think about it. In our moment-to-moment experience, there is no concept of time. There is only now, right? Like there's only now, there's only now, there's no now. If you have to think of what happened 2 years ago, it's a mental concept, because there's no such thing as like the past where you can go to. right? It's just something you can think about in your, like in your mind. You can think about the future. You can say, yes, 2 years from now, it's going to be 2023. Or like, 10 years ago, I was, 25 years old or whatever, right? Like whatever the ideas, they're all mental concepts. So from the subjective experience, there is only the now. There's only the now. And this is true for everybody. And when through our subjective experience, there is no time when I am not aware. I cannot find a moment when I was not aware. You can say, when I die, I won't be aware, but those are also all mental concepts. But from my own direct experience, I haven't had a moment when I was not on. And through this, I can say that this I is eternal from my subjective experience. Because the moment you say, oh, somebody says, oh, but when you die, you're not going to be eternal. Don't know that yet, right? But so far from all the experiences I have had, I know for a fact that I have always been there. My mind may not have been there, my body may not have been there, but I was always there. In my dream state, my physical body isn't there. I may have a separate body. When I'm thinking, daydreaming, my physical body isn't there with me when I'm daydreaming, right? I'm daydreaming that I'm vacationing on a boat in Mexico, but my physical body isn't there, but I am still there, which is my awareness, which is experiencing my dream, my daydream. So this I, you can say, is eternal. And then the next idea that, it is pure, it means that it is unblemished by anything. All these thoughts and like these physical objects, my emotions, they're all like objects in this awareness. But this awareness itself is pure, which means that it doesn't have anything. It reveals things in its vicinity, but by itself, it has nothing. It is just pure awareness. So that's the purity aspect. It's not a question of like, clean or dirty. It's more of like, does it have anything in it or does it not have anything in it? And the substance of it is just awareness. You can say something is pure when there is nothing other than its own substance. So, a gold ring is pure when it's fully made of gold. The moment it has some impurities, like, other metals in it, it becomes impure. Same thing with water. It's pure water only if it has water. If it has other stuff in it, then it's not pure water. If it has, dirt in it, it's not water. It's not pure water. So when you have to remove everything that's not water, and you are left with pure water. The same thing with the self. You remove anything that is not the self, and you're left with the self. And this self is just awareness, and it's pure in that sense. It's just awareness. It's just the self. It is nothing but consciousness. And then the third word is existence, which means that it is I never doubt that I exist. And the same way, I don't think any of us like really doubt that I exist, that I am, right? This I am is just shining moment to moment to moment to moment. I shine, and I reveal this world. So this existence also is its quality. That I feel that I am a conscious being which is alive. I don't know who I am, maybe, but I definitely know that I am. And that's the quality, that it is, yes. If you're feeling that way, then yes, that is the quality of the self. And then consciousness is, it has this ability to like reveal things. It makes us aware of certain things. So that's this consciousness aspect of it. And then finally, bliss is that any bliss that we feel in this world is because of the self. Because the moment my mind is resting in the self, our experience is that of bliss. And this bliss isn't, how we would really define like happiness. Happiness, we say, is something when we get what we want and something makes us happy. And similarly, we are sad when we don't get what we want. So that's sort of this sort of dependency on an object. But this bliss that we're talking about is just something that's true all the time. The sense of being and the sense of peace, or like the sense of like ecstasy, like that bliss is the quality of it. And it is hidden from us because of, our focus on other things. But this bliss is always there, and it can sort of seep out of our experience moment to moment. It can happen. So like when we do really get what we want, like let's say I have a desire for something, I've been striving to get this new PlayStation, which released, I don't know, like 6 months ago, I think, or maybe a year ago. And everyone was lining up for it, but it was sold out. I've been wanting to get it. I've been refreshing all these like different websites to find whether it's available. Finally, I get it. All right. And, it's not even appeared in my house. The order has been placed on the website. And now this whole, like, the agitation that I had for wanting it has dissolved because I finally have it. And for a moment, what has happened, the mind is no longer in agitation, right? This sort of pressure that was sort of held on to for so long because I really wanted this PlayStation has sort of gone. And for a moment, this bliss that is always there has seeped through, because the mind is no longer in this contracted state where it wants something really badly. It has sort of relaxed. And because of this relaxation, this bliss gets revealed. And so whenever we sort of feel, the sense of, like in some yoga classes, we do this like exhalation where let's like all release this breath and have this sigh. What's happening is that our mind for a moment is just relaxing. And because of this relaxation, this bliss peeps out for a split second and we feel good. But if we have this ability of, of the mind to be in this relaxed state all the time, then this bliss will be peeping through all the time. So that's how you can say that, the self's essence is bliss. And this may not be a direct experience right now, but that's why, we do this work, because once you get here where this bliss is available all the time, then the world becomes easy in terms of like being able to deal with whatever comes, because we know that for a fact that this bliss can be accessed at any time. So this is just like a sort of etymology of the word, and what does it mean and what is the nature. So this may not be our direct experience right now, but over time this is what we want to sort of keep in the back of mind. So whenever we are feeling these things, the Atman is shining through. You're kind of, or rather you're noticing that, yes, this is the nature of it. Whenever you drink water and you're like, oh, this is so cool. Yes, you're noticing that, yes, that's the nature of water. Whenever you're like out in the sun and like, light is shining and you're noticing that there's light, you're noticing its nature. So in the same way, whenever you notice that, there's this sense of existence or the sense of bliss, you're noticing that there's this nature of the self. So these are all sort of like reminders that you can use to kind of put our attention on the self again. Because our mind is always wanting to go and focus on external things. But we can sort of use these words and use this experience to bring ourselves back to the self. So that's kind of how we want to use this. Any thoughts about this?
Yeah, you said that consciousness was what?
So consciousness is an interesting word, I think, because it is so misunderstood. So what is the word here? Chit. So chit is essentially the word for consciousness in yoga, and it means the substance that is, or the fundamental substance for this world. And like, what is the fundamental substance of the self? It is consciousness. And this consciousness, so it's kind of like the consciousness is the Atman and the Atman is consciousness, like kind of like a chill in the next sort of word. But what it is this is the basic fundamental substance that is the cause of this entire universe, cause of our experience, cause of the self. So like you can say that what was there before the Big Bang, you can say that it was consciousness. And from consciousness came this entire world. So actually this world is nothing but consciousness. It just appears and looks like it's different. And through this idea that everything is consciousness, we got the idea of like, energy can never be created nor destroyed. That's sort of a subset of this idea, which is everything is consciousness. Because if everything is energy and it can neither be created nor destroyed, it just gets changed, what does that mean? It means that, right now we are this human form, we are going to dissolve. There's this some energy that is holding this in place, and that energy is going to be used somewhere else. That's basically what it means, right? But that's working at the level of energy, which is, when we learned about the 3 sheets, it was like the 3rd sheet. So it's a very it's a small slice of the truth, but it is true, no doubt. But this is saying, even going even deeper than that and saying, actually, everything is consciousness. Even energy is consciousness. And that's the fundamental substance of this entire world. Does that help?
Very much. Thank you.
Cool. Let us do one more. Atmanaha Satchadanshascha Buddhairvrittirati dvayam Sanyojya cha vivekena janamiti pravartate. So by the indiscriminate blending of the two, the existence consciousness aspects of the self and the thought wave of the intellect, there arises the notion of I know. All right. So now we're getting into like, what is our experience, right? So if the nature of the self is existence and consciousness, which has this property of, illumining things, the intellect has the quality of being able to think and create thoughts, right? That is what the intellect does. An animal, for example, does not have a very well-developed intellect. So they don't really have very sophisticated thoughts. They can say things like, oh, I'm hungry, I want to go pee, I want to like do, go out for a walk. Those are the sort of thoughts that they could have, but they could not have thoughts like, oh, I wonder why the sky is blue, right? Like those are very sort of developed thoughts that as of now, we only think humans can have. And that's the intellect, which is capable of doing that. It's a part of the mind. But the dog has the same self that I do. It doesn't have it's still experiencing the world and like the world is being revealed. It's just that their instruments of perception is different than my instruments of perception. Somebody who is colorblind has a different sense of different instruments of perception. Somebody who doesn't have ears, like, not ears, but like cannot hear, but has a different perception of this world. So everybody's perception is different based on the instruments that they have. Somebody may have a very well-developed intellect. Einstein, for example, his intellect was very, very strong. His perception of the world would be different because of the instrument being different. And here we're saying the intellect has this capacity for us to have thought waves. And because of the self-revealing things, and because the intellect is being used to formulate this world, we have this experience that I know, right? Like if I look at my outside the window right now, I can see the trees, I can see the sun out, and I can say, I know that it is daytime. Because of this, the awareness illumining, and my intellect is on. If my intellect was very dull, then I would not know that it is daytime, right? Like that thought wouldn't even occur. And this happens very quickly. That the self is shining, revealing stuff, objects are in its perception, and the intellect is constantly making observations and constantly reacting and creating thoughts. And this is happening very, very fast because the intellect operates in the world of the mind and the thoughts, and those thoughts are just essentially tiny forces coming up and going down, coming up and going down, and they're happening all the time. And it takes a very it takes a lot of attention to be able to discern that these are the thoughts that are happening. And there's also the unconscious, which has a bunch of like thoughts that are being, or rather unconscious, there's a force of the unconscious that's creating all these thoughts. But it takes a lot of energy to notice that these thoughts are happening. But if we can sort of be patient and notice it, like even in our meditation, if you're sitting and if you're being aware, we can start to notice that, wow, these are the thoughts that are coming up. But, if we don't have a sense of practice of, sitting down and noticing, like we may not even ever realize that these sort of thoughts are coming up. It may just be like, we're just reacting to these thoughts. But if we can kind of like get a sense of being a little still and noticing, then we can start to see that these thoughts are appearing and disappearing, appearing and disappearing. And this is happening all the time. Because of the speed of this, we kind of, whatever the thought that is revealed, I take that to be true. So for example, I can say, oh, I am a very intelligent person, right? Like that thought may just appear really quickly because I may think of myself as very smart. Because that thought has happened so fast, I take that to be true. And then I'm adding to my identity and saying, yes, I am a very intelligent person. Similarly, the opposite could be true, which is like, I may think I'm a stupid person. A thought appears, and then it appears so quickly that I take that to be true too. And this is because the self is, has this quality of just revealing things. It doesn't care. It reveals a good thought the same way as it reveals like a terrible thought. It doesn't care. But the intellect is the one that is sort of, has this quality of creating these thoughts. And it creates these thoughts because of memories and because of impressions, because of desires. All of these sort of have an influence on the thoughts that are being generated moment to moment. And because of that, we have this concept of I know. I think the next one is sort of going to be a continuation of this. So let's maybe do that so we can complete this idea, and then we will move to meditation. So Atmano Vikriya Nasti Buddhairbodho na Jatvati Jiva Sarva Malam Yatva Yatta Drishteti Muhyati. So Atman never does anything, and the intellect on its own accord has no capacity to experience I know. But the individuality in us, due to delusion, thinks that it itself is the seer and the knower. Cool. So the Atman is not really doing anything. All it is, its property is to reveal, right? So just like the sun just has light, it doesn't do anything to create the light. The sun, we can get into the physics of it, but forget all of that. But just the fact that the sun is light, it doesn't need to do anything to create the light. It is light. Similarly, Atman is awareness. It doesn't have to do anything to create this awareness, right? There's no moment when we are not aware. So this awareness is just the quality of it. And it is just awareing. It isn't really doing anything. The intellect is the one that is sort of creating these thoughts, and the awareness is revealing these thoughts. So I can have a thought that I am hungry. I can have a thought that I am stupid. All of these thoughts are happening, and my awareness is just illuminating these thoughts. And the intellect by itself, according to this verse, has no capacity to experience I know. So the intellect can have another thought that I know that I am stupid, right? And that is also revealed by this awareness. So the intellect by itself is not really conscious and aware. It's just that there's this awareness, let's say on top, which is just shining, and the intellect is constantly having thoughts. So it can have a thought that I am stupid. Then I can have a follow-on thought and say, oh, I know that I am stupid. Then I can have a follow-on thought and say that I know that I am stupid, right? Like this sort of infinite recursive thing can keep happening. But the intellect by itself is not really conscious. The conscious and the awareing faculty is the Atman, which is always illumining stuff. And the intellect can keep throwing up thoughts. It's just a bundle of thoughts. That's all it is. And a new thought, if I create a new thought, the intellect is changed slightly. If I keep replaying the same story over of the past, it remains the same. So the great news is that the intellect can change, in the sense like I can create new thoughts that will change the intellect and transform the intellect, because the intellect is nothing but a thought creating machine. And if it creates new thoughts, then my experience is going to be different. If I keep replaying the old story over and over again, it's going to be unchanged. The intellect will be unchanged. So the second part of the verse is that the individuality in us, due to delusion, thinks that it is itself the seer. So because of this delusion, I think the intellect is the knower and the seer, but actually it is the Atman, which is the seer. Even the fact that I am actually is an intellectual pursuit. I is the only thing that is actually true. The fact that I am, when you notice that I am, that is also an intellect driven thought. Because I am is always actually happening. You don't really have to think about it. It's just that when I notice it, it's the intellect which is actually noticing it. And the intellect will have this reflection and say, oh, I know that I am. But the I is actually always on. It never really needs to be, it doesn't need any extra validation. It's just that the intellect can reflect and say, yes, I know that I am. I am looking at I am right now. Oh, that is so cool. I am is amazing. All of these things are like intellectual thoughts that are created moment to moment. But the I is shining all the time. And so the delusion here is that we are so hung up on the intellect that we think that the intellect is I. And that's the misunderstanding. So when the intellect has thoughts that I am powerful, we think that, that is true. If the intellect has a thought that I am not powerful, we think that is true. Not realizing that this intellect is this inert bundle of thoughts that's just creating thoughts moment to moment, moment to moment. And that's all it is. And we can drop it. And if we drop the intellect completely, what is left is just the I. And then the intellect can come back, and you can use the intellect to solve problems, but whatever the intellect reports is false, including the fact that you think you're a self-realized person, or including the fact that you think you're not a self-realized person, or like a terrible person, or a wonderful person. Whatever you think, it is false, because the intellect can only generate inert thoughts, and it'll use those thoughts as data to form further opinions. All it is, it's an opinion creating machine. So that is the ignorance, that we need to look at the intellect for what it is. It is just a machine and a tool. And it is not you. It is not I. Any thoughts about this? If this doesn't make sense, put it on the shelf. Over time, I promise you it's going to make sense. For now, it is enough to know that I am something which is separate from the intellect. The intellect is certainly a part of my experience, but I am apart from it. That is enough. If we can deal with that, that's a good start. And over time, you can come back to this verse and maybe it will make a lot more sense, because it will come out of direct experience. Cool. I think this is a good place to stop for today. Verse 26. So we did 6 verses. So any thoughts, any questions, any observations? We have about 17 minutes left, so we can do a meditation as well. Okay, no thoughts, so let's do a meditation. So if you're lying down, maybe just sit up straight. Make sure your head, neck, and back are in a straight line. Just gently rock yourself forward or backward so that your head feels well balanced, doesn't feel strained. Start by taking a few deep breaths. Just noticing the breath in your body. Breath is an object of perception. So we're going to use the subject-object discrimination to keep seeing that every experience is an object of perception, including the breath. I can feel the breath in the body, just like I can see a cup on the table. So I'm not the cup. I know that for sure that I'm not a cup. So similarly, I could say I'm not the breath either. I am that which sees the breath. So continue to take these conscious breaths. So we're going to move one level closer from the body. We're going to move into the realm of emotions. If you can notice if you're feeling any emotion right now, maybe feeling happy, maybe feeling excited, and feeling low energy, maybe feeling angry, maybe feeling sad, whatever it is. Just notice, maybe feeling no emotion, it's fine too. But just notice that there is this realm in which we experience emotions too. And I perceive these emotions in the same way that I perceive the breath, in the same way that I perceive the cup. So I'm not the cup, I'm not the breath, I'm certainly not the emotions. I can take every emotion, even though they have a strong experience. The intensity of emotions are a lot more than, breath or a cup, and they last a lot longer as well. And because they last a little longer, we get lost in those emotions. But if we can keep this subject-object discrimination going, we can recognize that the emotion is also an object of experience. So we want to apply this when we get lost in an emotion. Just to notice that, yes, it is not me, not I. So from the emotion, we're going to go one more level closer and subtler, which is at the realm of thoughts. You may be thinking of what to do after class. You may be thinking of what to eat. This is all in the realm of thought. And the thought is experienced in the same way. I know the thought, but I reveal the thought, but I am aware of the thought. So if you're thinking of what to eat, for dinner today or for lunch. You're experiencing the thought in the same way that you experience an emotion, that you experience the breath, that you experience the cup. I is revealing the thought. So we want to keep bringing our attention to this I. This is the seat of our awareness. And if we can bring our attention to this I, maybe you can start to notice that it feels like if you can feel the space of this awareness or this context in which I can experience thoughts, I can experience emotions, I can experience my breath even, my body. There is the space of consciousness or the space of awareness. This is yourself, not the thoughts, not the emotion, not the body, but this space. We want to keep bringing our mind to this place, this I. slowly, very slowly. When you're ready, you may open your eyes. So let's end this class by doing the ending chant. I'll share my screen again. Yogarato va, Yogarato va, Yogarato va, Yogarato va, Sangarato va, Sangavihina, Sangarato va, Sangavihina, Yasya Brahmani Ramate Chetam, Yasya Brahmani Ramate Chetam, Nandeti Nandeti Nandatyeva, Nandeti Nandeti Nandatyeva, Nandeti Nandeti Nandatyeva. So this is the translation. Verse 19 of Bhaja Govindam is where this is from. And I love this verse because it is reveals to us why we do this work. Because, you know, we want to feel ecstatic and enjoy this world. It's a great blessing to be a human being and have this human birth. So we want to learn how to make the best use of this opportunity. I hope you know, reveling in the self is a thing that all of us get to experience, and I hope this is true for all of us. So that's the end of this class. Just for we're not going to have class next week because I'm going to be going on a trip. So next Saturday will not be a class. I'm going to send a reminder on the group as well. But we will be back the week after. And I guess continue to practice, continue to have a meditation practice. You know, this work is effective if we are practicing, because whatever you put in is what we're going to get out. You know, the attention is the only thing we can give to anything. You know, so we have to put attention on this work and use these tools and apply it in our day-to-day, and that's going to actually change the mind, because the mind has a lot of past forces which are at play. You know, the karma that we have, and those forces are strong, and we have to move that in a different direction for this work to be effective. And once we understand, you know, the way these forces work, then we can kind of be free from these forces, and we can change the direction of our life completely. So have a practice, meditate for, you know, at least, you know, I would say 15 minutes a day, 15 to 20 minutes a day. You know, make this a habit, like you're brushing your teeth every morning or evening whenever you meditate. And then also just, you know, pay attention even on day-to-day. Try to be as attentive to things as possible in your day-to-day. You know, try to notice that I am, this sense of awareness. You know, maybe set, you know, what in the beginning days of my practice, I used to set like reminders on my phone to kind of just spend like a minute or two, you know, and 3 times in the day, just to remind myself to think about this, like I am, or just notice that I am. Like maybe it's just taking a minute break, and maybe you're working and you just want to take a minute break, but just spend this minute just noticing that, oh yes, I am, even now, in the middle of my workday. Then, when you're eating lunch, notice, oh, I am, even while I'm eating lunch. So this I amness is there all the time. There's no moment when it's not, but just noticing that it is true. It is true. And this is going to be very helpful. And even in situations where you're freaking out or like you're, anxious, even then, if you can remember that, yes, I am, just notice that too. The experience may be, oh, I'm super anxious right now, but the I amness is true even then. So you want to develop this capacity to like notice this I amness, and this is what is going to take us forward to the next step. But the basis is, getting really familiar with this I am. So that's it. I think that's the end of today's class. I'm happy to hang out and chat with anyone who has questions. But I will see you 2 weeks from now, not the next week.
Thank you, Puneet. Happy
Thanks, Puneet.
Easter. Happy spring break.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.